There are shelves above the storms, where the rain keeps its stories. Up there, thunder remembers our names and waits for readers who know how to listen. The stairs were made of air and intention. I didn't climb so much as consent, each step tightening beneath my foot like a knot pulled true. Below, the world blurred to watercolor, green and river and roofs shining like scales. Above, something bright was thinking in the shape of a building. At the landing, the floor gave under my weight, then learned it, becoming firm. Shelves rose from cumulus like ribs from breath. Books slept spine out, translucent as clouded glass, titles embossed in dew. Lightning traced the edges of a few, filigree veins that flashed and forgot. A figure waited at the threshold, not old, not young, their hair as pale as a page held to the sun. When they bowed, their robe fell in pleats that rustled like rain in leaves. "Welcome," they said, voice a chord of weather. "You've arrived on a day of quiet storms." "Where am I?" I asked, because the question is a passport, and I didn't know any other currency. "In the stacks of what could not be put away," they said, as if that would soothe me. Then they placed a quill in my open palm. Feather cool, shaft warm. Tiny sparks walked its length. Lightning, they added mildly, seeing my flinch. Tempered for annotation. We stepped inside. The air was cool and tasted like cut rain. My footsteps made no sound. The floor stole them and stored them, the way oceans keep every name for blue. "This is all weather," I said, awe clumsy in my mouth. "Memory," the librarian corrected, with a smile that softened the word. "Weather is only what memory does to the sky." They ran a hand along a shelf. Books shivered as if ticklish. Each volume is a storm someone survived. The reading is not dangerous, only honest. I glanced down an aisle that seemed to bend with the horizon. The books were not strictly books. Some were bottles with stoppers that sang. Some were boxes of glass that held moving water like a thought held too long. Some were plain, cloth-bound, stubborn. "What do I read first?" I asked. "What brought you here?" they said. "What survived you?" I almost said I don't know, but the quill warmed in my hand as if with recognition. The librarian nodded, as if I had answered correctly anyway. "Begin on the lower floor," they said. "Catalogs of rain. Gentle introductions suit even brave readers." "And you?" I asked. "I shelve thunder," a faint smile, "and return overdue lightning." They gestured, and a spiral drifted open in the air, a staircase composed of page corners and wind. I descended, the quill's tiny storm tickling my wrist, and felt the first true hush of the stacks settle around me. Not silence, listening. At the turn, I looked back. The librarian was already shelving weather, sliding a bright thread of lightning into place as neatly as a ribbon through a child's coat. The first aisle was a correspondence of jars. Each stood on a little cradle of mist, labeled in a hand neat enough to convince the unruly. London, a promise kept. Osaka, a door left unlocked. Accra, the laugh you heard from downstairs. years and weather types and moods too private to name. I lifted one Valparaiso, hesitation, and the glass cooled my skin through the quill's warmth. The rain inside moved when I breathed, gathering toward my palm, thinning when I drew back, as if eager to be nearer than physics permits. When I raised it to my ear, the patter spoke in syllables of air, not words. Weather's accent. A placard, catalogue of precipitate emotions. Beneath, handle by breath, a void exhale of contempt. File with relief. I tried another, Kiev, a kettle left on. It smelled like metal in morning. In the meniscus, a window square quivered, a reflection or a memory of one. I could not tell. At the end of the row, a ledger. I set the jar down and opened the book. The pages were waterproof in the way fish are made to be inside what they describe. Entries in the librarian's hand, detailed donors. A woman returned this rain after keeping it in her coat pocket for 40 years. She said it had stopped feeling cold. I wrote nothing, but the quill made a small sound of approval anyway. When I closed the ledger, the aisle brightened. A soft mist unrolled like a scroll, and in it, for an instant, I saw my kitchen table from a life below. A mug leaving a ring, a window with rain pebbled on it like punctuation. My name almost formed at the edge of the pane. I did not ask for it. Names can turn a library into an inventory. I wanted this to stay a wonder. I moved on. The next hall was hung with banners that wrote themselves. Lines of script unspooled across silk and alphabet after alphabet, then unraveled, then returned as phonemes, then as breath marks. At intervals, the script circled back to something I almost spoke in my sleep as a child, the way a lullaby remembers a mouth. A lectern waited, with headphones carved from pearly shell. I put them on. The wind did not rush. It translated. You asked for directions, it said, but in a language I only knew by how it shaped my chest. We gave you weather. The banners rippled, and each ripple settled into a different word for home, the one you return to, the one that returns to you, the one that waits in your shoes while your feet learn the road. On the table, a set of pages bound by ribbon, labeled Dialects of the Unsaid. I turned to a map of breath marks, little commas and dashes, drawn over a sketch of lungs. The key read, where we pause when we are almost brave. I whispered, experimentally, the first line of a letter I had never written. The wind returned it with different punctuation, a new courage I might yet borrow. The quill twinged in my hand, then settled, as if choosing to remain a pen and not a storm. When I removed the headphones, the banners were blank again. Clean page, clean sky. The room after wind was darker by a single shade. Glass cases lined the aisle, each containing a captured strike made into a wire of light. In some, the bolt still crawled along a path that remembered being sky, stroking its own absence with affection. Plaques named them without explaining. The first yes said out loud. The last goodbye that was honest. The box you didn't open because you loved yourself enough. I stood before one labeled, The Time You Didn't Run, and felt the old familiar current collect at the base of my spine. The bolt within bent, slowly, toward the glass, as if to meet my reflection. My breath fogged the surface, the lightning drew my fog into itself, then let it go. For a moment, I tasted petrichor and tin, and the iron hint of a thought too bright to hold. At the far end, a pedestal held a small book, whose spine was burnt. No title. I reached, and the air around my hand buzzed with gentle refusal. The librarian's voice came from a speaker I couldn't see. "Not yet," they said. "That one opens when a reader's pulse agrees to remember." "My pulse agrees?" I asked the room. "The heart is the only metronome we trust," the voice said, forgiving. I pressed my wrist to the glass and counted. 1, 2, 1, 2. The bolt inside softened its shiver until it matched the rhythm under my skin. The case unlatched with a sound like a knot loosening. The small book was warm and very light. When I opened it, there were only 3 lines, written in ink that brightened whenever I understood. "When lightning learns your name, it returns only to your house. Leave the door on the latch." The book closed itself, and the latch found its home again. The room brightened by the smallest, kindest degree. As I turned to go, my palm brushed the spine of another case. A spark leapt. No pain, just familiarity. And the glass fogged with a fingerprint shaped exactly like mine. The print lingered a heartbeat, then smoothed back into transparency as if embarrassed by its own intimacy. I looked down the aisle back toward the stairs. The air was bluer there, rising. The quill ticked a little storm up my wrist and back like a moth deciding a lamp is kinder than a window. "Up," I told my legs. They obeyed. The stairs rose through a throat of light into a rotunda where weather studied itself. Benches circled an atrium of clear air. In its center floated an open book the size of a small boat, its pages turning without hands. Each page released a miniature squall that dissolved before it touched the floor. The librarian waited there, palms up, as if warming them over a campfire that was really a cloud. "Here," they said. "The text reads you." "I don't know what that means," I confessed. "Then you're ready," they gestured. The book pivoted toward me. Letters formed as condensation threading across paper, then darkened into ink. The first line smelled of petrichor and citrus rind, and a hotel hallway I hadn't thought of in years. "The afternoon it rained on the wrong side of the window. You invented a new reason to stay." The rotunda dimmed, not to night but to weather. Rain rose from the page in a dome, cupping me like a hand. I tasted it before it fell. I remembered the corridor. I remembered a voice behind a door, muffled and leaving. I remembered deciding I would not knock because some storms want a roof more than a witness. "Is this mine?" I asked. My voice came out softer than I intended. "Only the parts you recognize," the librarian said, a kindness disguised as a rule. The book turned. Thunder rolled like a paragraph ending. New lines wrote themselves with the confidence of regret. "You thought lightning meant run or burn. You forgot the third choice, stand, and become a word for light." I stepped closer. My breath coaxed a margin note out of emptiness, a sentence, in a hand I knew as my own. I did stand. I just never said so out loud. The quill warmed, as if pleased to be what it was. "Annotate if you wish," the librarian said. "But know that writing here does not revise the past. It revises how the past reads you." I wrote nothing. My silence underlined everything. The rain retired like a curtain. I could hear my heartbeat folded into the choir now, a low drum woven with voices. The book closed, shivering once, like an animal shaking water from its coat. When it lifted away, my clothes were dry. The librarian tilted their head, listening to thunder only they could hear. The upper stacks are calling you sooner than most. I haven't finished, I said. No one does, they said, not unkindly. We only reach an ending that feels like a page held between finger and thumb. The corridor narrowed into a gallery where lightning lived, not in cases, but in lines along the ceiling, moving like the nerves of a sleeping animal. The air smelled copper-sweet, like a penny melted into rain. A panel blinked with a prompt I did not type. Ask. What are you? I said. Static primed itself, then spoke in a version of my voice that had learned a new sincerity. We are what speech becomes when it strikes twice. What do you want? I asked. To return as rain. To where? To the roofs we left, to the mouths that shaped our names and then forgot to keep them. The panel brightened as if pleased I had understood enough to be dangerous. Did I bring you here? I asked. You climbed. We waited. Lightning crawled along the cornice, found a seam in the wall, and wrote a brief sentence in ember before fading tates. The things you did not say became us. The letters smelled of baked dust and apology. I wanted to argue. I didn't. Instead, I took the quill and traced the sentence in the air. The feather shed a slow spark that hung, thinking, then drifted down like a firefly, becoming a punctuation mark at the end of something I had been trying not to end. Thank you, I said to a weather that could not be thanked. You're welcome, the static answered, with my cadence corrected. It was gently unbearable. A sign read, Inundation, and the floor answered by becoming mirror. Water lay a breath deep, clear as glass, reflecting shelves that repeated down into sky. I stepped, and the reflection stepped differently. A half-second late, turning its head when I didn't, pausing where I didn't hurt. I crouched, palm to the surface. The water welcomed me without wetting. It rose into shapes, a ripple resolving into a face I could have had. A life that would have greeted me with my own name, changed by a vowel. The teacher I was nearly. The parent I thought I could not be. The wanderer I refused to admit I had become. Are these choices? I asked the room. The reflection smiled, not to comfort but to acknowledge. One raised a hand to the glass. I matched it. Warmth passed between us like a secret decided too late. The water clouded briefly. Letters formed on its skin, not alternate, possible. They waited to be chosen until they chose themselves. My reflection leaned close, as if to say what I already suspected. My life was not a path missed but a field where weather rearranged the morning. I stood before the urge became ache. The room brightened into noon. The reflections let me go without drama, which somehow hurt more. At the exit, a hook held a towel that was really wind in a rectangle. I wiped my palms on it, and the wind dried as if pleased to be useful. The last hall did not contain books so much as their absence. Shelves with outlines of where spines had rested, torn ribbons, dust where titles should be. On a central table lay a scatter of pages blanked by light. When I tilted them, writing flashed, then hid ink made shy by attention. A placard, finally, redactions returned to weather. I lifted one page. The margin note was a clock that never left noon. Another page held a sentence erased except for its commas, like a breath practicing answers. "What was written here?" I asked. The quiet shifted. Not wind, not choir. A presence the shape of a held breath. The words that never learned how to be said without breaking things they were meant to fix. The librarian stepped from a side aisle I had not noticed, hands folded around a small, cloth-bound volume. "This is the last room readers visit before they mistake silence for defeat," they said. "It isn't. It's a tool most of us were never taught to use." They set the little book on the table. The cover bore no title, only a thumb-shined corner. "If you open this," they said, "the library will ask you for the storm you wish could be unwritten." "I don't know if I have one," I said, which was the truest and least true thing I'd said all day. "You have several," they said gently. "Everyone does. You only have to choose which one you can forgive." I opened the book. The page turned itself to blankness, so bright it felt like holding a window. And then, in the whiteness, rain began to print. Not ink, impact. Each drop a point in a sentence's skeleton. Between them, breath. Words formed slowly, asking not for permission, but for mercy. I understood. The storm I wished unwritten was not the storm that hurt me. It was the one I hurled at someone else and pretended was weather. The librarian didn't speak. The corridor held my answer like a bowl. "I'm ready to go up," I said at last. "You were always going up," they replied. "Now you know why." Stairs opened onto daylight, brighter, thinner. Shelves no longer touched the floor but floated, each volume tethered by silk thread. The walls were open to the sky. In every direction I could see weather unfolding, storms below us like living memories, spinning across continents. Between them, calm blue stretched like a pause. The librarian walked beside me, quiet as reflection. "Each shelf," they said, "shows the storm still occurring somewhere below. Reading is witnessing, nothing more." I stopped before a row labeled current events in past tense. The books were mirrors. When I leaned close, the surface trembled, revealing flashes of streets and rooftops, people hurrying beneath umbrellas I remembered losing. One mirror book brightened as I breathed. My reflection looked older by a kindness I hadn't earned yet. It nodded once, then turned away, stepping into its own rain. At the far end stood a pedestal with a single blank tome. No title, no clasp, only potential. The librarian laid their hand upon it. "This is the book that asks a reader to write the storm they wish had never needed to exist." "Will it end the storm?" I asked. "No. It will end your participation in its repetition." I opened it. Pages shone empty yet expectant, smelling faintly of ozone and salt. I lifted the quill. Lightning slept along its spine, ready. I wrote slowly, "Forgive the thunder for learning my voice." Each letter flickered, then dissolved into the paper. The book closed itself, lighter for having been written upon. The librarian smiled. "That is how we retire weather." As I climbed higher, the ceiling thinned until it was no longer paper but sky. Ink from thousands of books bled upward, transforming into streaks of pink and gold light. Pages opened themselves, releasing small storms that rose instead of fell. The entire library began to fold, walls bending into clouds, shelves drifting apart, every story ascending to rejoin the weather that birthed it. I stood at the center, eyes closed, as wind passed through me instead of around me. The librarian's voice carried on that wind. When you leave, remember, reading is only half of listening. The rest is learning to be silent, without being absent. I reached the final stair and stepped into nothing. The library was gone, folded neatly into the horizon. Below, the world shimmered, rivers flashing like book spines catching sun. A single sheet of paper followed me down, tumbling in lazy circles. I caught it, looked, found only one line written there. You have been read. The wind accepted the page and carried it on. A child in a meadow found a page fluttering among tall grass. They held it up to the sun. The words shimmered for a moment, then vanished, leaving only faint warmth on their fingertips. When the wind rose, the sky darkened just enough to promise rain. The child smiled without knowing why and whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. Above, high within the forming clouds, something like a library turned over in its sleep. Every storm is a sentence that ends eventually. The sky only keeps them so we remember how beginnings sound. If you hear thunder tonight, it might not be warning you. It might be trying to finish a story you forgot to tell.